My name is Nia. I'm 27 now, but back then I was 15 and raw, living in Jackson, Mississippi, where the heat was sticky, the schools were brutal, and being different meant being destroyed. I wasn't born to blend in. From the time I could choose for myself, I wore the things that made people flinch. Tattoos crawling up my neck and arms, piercings that glittered like defiance, a shaved head I refused to cover. My mother called it rebellion. My teachers called it disruption. My classmates called it a reason to aim their spit, their words, their laughter, their fists, a reason to remind me that being a girl like me, in a place like that, was a mistake no one would forgive. The day it happened wasn't the first, just the worst. I remember the chair shaking behind me when the first wad of spit hit the top of my head. I just sat down, hadn't even opened my notebook yet. The classroom was already thick with heat and boredom and unspoken cruelty, and I knew something was coming the moment I stepped in. You learn to read a room when survival depends on it. You hear the laughter before it lands. You feel the eyes. Long before they look at you, when it hit me, it wasn't just the physical, the wet sound, the warm disgust of it sliding down my scalp. It was the way no one said a word. Not the teacher, not the kid sitting closest. Silence like a signal. Silence like permission. I hunched forward, hands gripping the edge of the desk, throat closing. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But my legs didn't move. Instead, I slid down to the floor, crawled under the desk, and tried to make myself smaller than pain. And then I heard it. The click of a phone unlocking. The start of a recording. He didn't say my name. He didn't call out. But I knew it was him, my brother, Jamal. Same school, one grade above, always watching from the edges, pretending he didn't know me in public unless someone wanted a laugh. That day, he wanted one. I could hear his breath, the tiny chuckle he couldn't hold in. I didn't know where he was standing, but I could feel the phone pointed at me like a weapon. I curled tighter under the desk, my shoulders pressed into my ears, my hands covering my face. I was shaking, not because I was afraid of them, not anymore. Fear had calcified into something worse. Expectation. I was shaking because I realized I wasn't even safe from my own blood. My brother wasn't filming to protect me. He was filming to entertain them. He was filming to belong. It wasn't the first time he'd stood by, but this time he wanted proof. This time he wanted something to share, something to show his boys at lunch, something to post in the group chat with a clever caption. Something that said, "Look how weak she is, look how far she's fallen, look how she screams when she thinks no one will help." But I didn't scream. Not out loud. My mouth opened, but the sound stuck in my chest, thick and sour. My heart thudded against my ribs like it wanted out. My nails dug into the floor, into myself. My head stayed low, and the spit kept dripping. I could feel it cooling now, mixing. With sweat, with shame. A puddle at my knees. A puddle no one would clean. Time stopped under that desk. Minutes stretched out like punishment. I counted tiles, counted breaths, counted how many people would pretend they didn't see anything. I heard the bell ring, heard chairs scrape, heard someone laugh, someone mutter something about chrome. Dome tears. Then footsteps, lots of them, leaving. No one stayed, not even him. The phone clicked off, and he walked out with the rest of them. I stayed there until the next class came in and someone kicked my leg, like I was trash they hadn't. Cleared. I got up slowly, skin buzzing, eyes dry. My face was blank, but something inside me had torn. Not a scream, not a sob, something deeper. A crack that would echo for years. I didn't tell anyone. Not the counselor, not my parents, not even the principal when I skipped the rest of the week. No one asked why. They were used to me vanishing, used to me breaking and returning in silence. I wasn't the kind of girl people worried about. I was the lesson, the warning, the body. At the edge of the hall, you step over on your way to something better. When I finally went back, the video had already made the rounds. Group chats, Snapchat, a clipped version uploaded under the name Chrome Girl Breakdown. The caption? Guess she finally melted. They watched it between classes, laughed in the cafeteria. I saw it once, just once. Someone showed it to me without knowing I was the girl in it. And I watched. I watched myself trembling under a desk, my head wet, my arms folded like a shield, my mouth open in silent agony, and I felt nothing. No tears, no heat, just a numbness. That settled into my bones and made a home. That night, I shaved the last inch of hair I had left. I leaned into the mirror, looked myself dead in the eyes, and whispered a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. One day they would watch me again. And this time, I would be standing. It didn't take long for the video to spread. By the time I got home that day, the house felt different. Quieter somehow, but not in a peaceful way. Like the walls were holding their breath. Like they'd seen something they weren't sure how to swallow. I walked through the front door and straight to my room. Didn't bother taking off my shoes. My hoodie stuck to the back of my neck, still damp. The spit had dried into my skin, crusted into the folds where shame hides best. I could feel it there even after 2 showers. No soap strong enough to scrub off what had been seen, what had been shared. My brother wasn't in his room. His door was wide open, light off, his gaming headset dangling from the chair like it had just slipped from his hand. I stood there for a second, staring at the empty space he left behind. The screen on his desk still glowed, messages blinking in the corner, notifications from group chats I wasn't supposed to see. But I stepped closer anyway. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe denial, maybe guilt. What I found was worse. Laughter, reactions, dozens of them, screenshots, edited clips, my face under red text that read "Breakdown of the Month." My body, curled up beneath a desk, looped into a GIF. They passed me around like a meme, like I was nothing but a twitching moment of amusement. And at the top of it all, my brother's username proudly captioned, "Tatted freak screaming again, LM4." That was it. That was all I was to him, to them. Not his sister, not a person, just a punchline he got to own. My stomach turned. I clicked through more messages, each one worse than the last. Jokes about how I look like a prison sketch, about how I probably lick razors for fun. Someone said they should drop her in the dog shelter. She already sounds like one. Another. Can't tell if she's crying or howling. Either way, mute that sht. And in the middle of it, my brother dropping heart reacts, laughing. Emojis crying from laughter stickers like confetti. I wasn't just his sister anymore. I was his content. I backed out of the room before I could see more. My chest was tight. My skin felt too small. I went to the bathroom and locked the door, looked at myself in the mirror. The tattoos, the piercings, the bare head, all the things I had chosen to mark myself with, things that once made me feel powerful, unshakable, were now proof. Proof that I had made myself too easy to hate. I traced the ink on my neck with shaking fingers, the roses, the black work that curled down to my collarbone. I had etched these things into me to take control of my body, to own it in a world that kept trying to erase it. But now it felt like I'd handed them the tools to hurt me harder. Every mark a target, every choice another reason to spit, to laugh, to film. I sat on the bathroom floor until the tile numbed my legs. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The tears felt locked behind something heavier, something that didn't want release. Just silence. I thought about deleting myself. Not literally, but digitally. Erasing every photo, every account, every trace of my presence online so they couldn't follow me anymore. But I knew it wouldn't work. Once a video's out there, it lives. It multiplies. It becomes something separate from you. I wasn't Naya anymore. I was that girl from the video. At school, they didn't even whisper. They didn't have to. Their eyes said everything. They looked at me like I was the mascot of some cruel inside joke. People I'd never spoken to smirked when I passed. Teachers paused when they saw me. One even asked if I was okay, but her voice was laced with pity. And I hated it more than the silence. Pity was just another form of distance. Another way to say, I won't stop this, but I'll watch. My brother never said a word. Not at home. Not at school. He acted like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't started the fire. Like he wasn't still feeding it with every joke. Every grin when someone showed him a new remix of my breakdown. I watched him once. During lunch, surrounded by the same boys who used to throw gum in my hood. All of them laughing at something on his phone. I didn't need to ask what it was. I knew the rhythm of that clip by heart. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep. I opened my laptop. I stared at the blinking cursor in the search bar for a long time. Then I typed one word: silence. Videos popped up, speeches, music, articles, and then I saw it. An open submission for a youth video project called Louder Than You Think. They were asking for raw stories. Unfiltered. True. I didn't know why I clicked. I didn't know what I would say. I only knew that if they were going to keep watching me, I wanted to decide what they saw. If they were going to quote me, mock me, clip me into GIFs, I would give them something they couldn't laugh off. I didn't have a plan, just a camera, just a voice that hadn't been completely stolen yet. I pressed record, and I stared into the lens like it was a witness, not a weapon. After the video, everything changed. Not in the way you hope things will change after you've already been broken once. There was no sudden compassion, no unexpected ally stepping forward, no adult saying enough. No, it changed the way mold spreads after a crack in the wall goes unnoticed for too long. Quiet, rotting. I could feel it settling into the cracks of my day, into the rhythm of walking, breathing, existing. Every hallway I entered braced. Every glance I caught, I prepared for venom. I stopped asking questions in class, stopped raising my hand. I even changed the way I walked, shoulders in, head slightly down, arms folded across my chest. Like a living shield. But the thing about shrinking yourself is people take it as an invitation to get closer. It started with comments. Always loud enough for me to hear, never directed straight at me. Someone asking if I got my tattoos in juvie. Another wondering if I shaved my head to join a cult or to hide the lice. It grew from there. Hands reaching out to touch me without permission. Fingers brushing the ink on my arms. The back of my neck, like I was a museum piece or a dare. They said they just wanted to see if it was real, but they always did it when the teachers weren't looking. Always with grins they didn't even try to hide. By the second week, I'd memorized all the exits. Not just the ones in school, but the ones around school, the long ways home, the alleys, the broken fence behind the maintenance shed. I stopped using the front entrance entirely. There were always 2 or 3 of them waiting near the gate, boys who knew I wouldn't fight. Back, girls who thought my silence was arrogance. They made games out of it. How close they could get. How far they could push. How many names they could call me in one breath. One day, I walked toward the school's side door and saw one of them standing there, waiting. He held up his phone, didn't even try to hide it. Another one leaned against the wall behind him, arms crossed, eyes already on my throat. I felt it before it happened, like I always did. The tension in the air, the way they pulled their laughter tight like a slingshot. I sped up, turned the corner fast, slipped through the gate near the dumpsters, and bolted across the grass behind the gym. My boots hit the pavement hard, my breath sharp in my chest. That's when I started using the back alley to go home. It was longer. It smelled like rot and piss and oil, but it was quiet. It was mine. I duck behind the old church, cut through. The lot where the homeless men nodded at me without judgment, and then slip into the alley behind my building. The fire escape led straight to my bedroom window. I learned to climb it like it was a staircase built just for me, feet finding grooves I once thought were dangerous and now depended on. Some days they caught me anyway. Not all of them. Just 1 or 2, enough to ruin the silence. A shout across the street. A bottle tossed near my feet. Spit aimed high, like a mark they wanted to hit just once. The worst was the time I felt warm wetness land just below my collar. I didn't have to look to know what it was. I didn't scream. Didn't stop. Just kept walking, my spine stiff, my mouth shut, my fists curled tight in my sleeves. I stopped wearing tank tops. Stopped wearing color. Black became armor. Hoodie's my shield. I pulled the strings so tight sometimes the fabric cut into my throat. But I wore it anyway. I needed the pressure, needed to feel contained. If I couldn't control what they saw, I could at least control what I covered. I began to dread the last bell more than anything else in the day. Not because the lessons were over, but because the performance was done. I no longer had the classroom as a weak buffer. After school meant exposure. After school meant navigating minefields with no map. It meant waiting for the wrong voice to shout from behind and for my body to lock up before I could run. There were days when I'd walk the long way home just to avoid anyone who might know my name. I'd loop blocks, change sidewalks, duck behind hedges when cars slowed down. I stopped using headphones. I needed to hear them coming. Once, I passed a group of middle schoolers and one of them pointed at my neck. He asked if it was a sticker. Another laughed and said, "No, it was probably a curse." I didn't even flinch. Just walked past them like I hadn't heard. But I carried that moment with me for weeks. Carried it into sleep, into showers, into the quiet space under my blanket. Where my breath stayed small and cold, home wasn't a refuge. My brother barely looked at me anymore. When he did, it was with the same half-smile he gave strangers on the street. He never apologized, never brought up the video again. But I could feel it between us like static, like every time he walked past, he was daring me to speak, daring me to break, and I never did. I started writing again, but only in scraps, torn notebook paper stuffed into the pockets of my jacket. Words that didn't make sense to anyone but me. Fragments of sentences, feelings I couldn't say out loud. I needed them to go somewhere. If I didn't put them somewhere, they'd start leaking out in ways I couldn't control. I told myself it would stop, that the video would fade, that they'd get bored. But I knew better. I wasn't a moment anymore. I was a symbol. I was the example. The one you could humiliate without consequence. The one no one defended. The one whose body was public property. Whose pain was crowdsourced. Whose silence was expected. But in the silence, something else was growing. Not rage, not revenge. Something colder, more patient. Something I hadn't named yet. When I finally told them, it wasn't because I wanted comfort. It wasn't because I believed they would help. I told them because I had nowhere else to put the pain. It was leaking out of me in quiet ways. In the way I couldn't meet my own. Eyes in the mirror, in the way I jumped when a door slammed too loud, in the way I gripped the stair railing so tight my knuckles turned white every time I came home. I needed them to at least know, not because I expected them to care, but because I wanted the silence to end somewhere. They sat on opposite ends of the couch like two strangers waiting for a bus. My mother was scrolling on her phone. My father was watching the television with the sound off. Remote balanced on his stomach like it was glued there. I stood in the doorway of the living room with the words stuck in my throat, fists clenched at my sides, eyes burning but dry. I told them about the video, about the spit, about the hallway laughter, the messages, the fear. I told them everything, except how much it had changed me. When I finished, there was a pause. Not a heavy, shocked kind of pause. Just a pause. Like when you skip a beat in a song and the melody keeps going. My father didn't even look away from the screen. My mother sighed, dropped her phone into her lap, and said it was my fault. She said it like it was obvious, like it was common sense. Like anyone with a shaved head and tattoos and piercings should expect to be ridiculed. She asked what I thought would happen walking around looking like a billboard for bad decisions. My father nodded once, still staring ahead, and muttered something about consequences. That was it. That was their response. I stood there for a long time after they finished talking, not moving, not breathing. I waited for something else. A crack, a shift, even a hint of regret. But there was nothing. The air was dead. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. And in that moment, I knew they weren't just indifferent. They were complicit. They believed I deserved it. They believed the spit, the shame, the isolation, the way my own brother had turned me into a public joke. All of it was just part of the deal. The price I paid for refusing to be what they wanted, for choosing to look like me instead of disappearing into their expectations. I wasn't their daughter. I was their embarrassment. Something they whispered about when relatives asked too many questions. A warning they used when talking to my younger cousins. Don't end up like her. I walked back to my room and shut the door quietly. Not slamming it, not making a scene. Just closing it like I was closing a door on something deeper. On hope. On the part of me that still wanted them to see me. To defend me. To love me. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights off, the screen of my phone lighting my face as I scrolled through old photos. There was one from before I shaved my head. I had long braids then. I wore hoop earrings and soft clothes. I smiled in that photo, a real smile, wide and unguarded. It looked like a different person, someone I no longer knew, someone who still thought that love was unconditional. I deleted the picture. I opened my journal and wrote the sentence over and over, I am not the problem. I am not the problem. I am not the problem. My hand cramped. My pen tore the page by the 5th repetition, but I kept going. It didn't feel true yet, but maybe if I wrote it enough, it would become something I could believe. The next morning, they didn't mention it. My mother told me to clean the dishes before school. My father asked if I had gas in the car. The world kept turning like I hadn't unraveled in front of them 12 hours earlier. Like their words hadn't hollowed something in me I hadn't even realized was still intact. At school, the air was heavier. The video was still circulating. Someone played it out loud during lunch. The sound of my voice, cracked, panicked, desperate, filled the room for a second before someone hit pause, laughing so hard they nearly dropped their tray. I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. I just ate my food slowly, like it wasn't happening. Like I wasn't there. But something inside me was shifting, not healing, not yet, but hardening. The part of me that used to ache for belonging started to go numb. The part of me that used to cry in the bathroom now stared back at the mirror with a flatness that even I couldn't recognize. I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was trying not to disappear, and the more I realized no one was coming to save me, not my classmates, not my brother, not my parents, the more I started thinking I would have to save myself. Not just once, not just from them, but every single day. In every room, in every stare, in every silence. And maybe, just maybe, I'd learn to turn their laughter into something louder, something that burned in their throats long after they stopped remembering why they ever thought I was funny. I stopped eating without really noticing at first. At breakfast, I just wasn't hungry. At lunch, I didn't want to hear the sound of chewing while the kids at the next table laughed at something I couldn't see but knew was probably about me. By dinner, I told my mother I'd already eaten. She didn't check. She never checked. That first day passed quietly, like I was watching myself from a distance. The second day, I felt the emptiness sharpen. A headache bloomed behind my eyes and my knees buckled slightly every time I stood too fast, but I liked it. I liked the ache. It was physical, clear, manageable, unlike the noise in my chest that had no shape, only pressure. By the third day, I was lightheaded and slow. My skin felt loose, like it didn't belong to me anymore. My hoodie hung differently on my frame. My stomach made quiet sounds during class, and I pressed my forearm against it to muffle the noise. I told myself that hunger was control, that if I could master the way I consumed, maybe I could shrink myself out of the narrative they'd written me into. Smaller meant safer. Smaller meant forgettable. I didn't want to be seen anymore. I just wanted to stop being a target. I stood in front of the mirror that night, the bathroom door locked behind me, fingers tracing the dark shapes of my eyebrows. I stared at my reflection, at the hard lines of my face that people called aggressive, intimidating, too much. The tattoos, the piercings, the shaved head. My face looked like defiance, even when I felt like a bruise. I held the razor in my hand for a long time. Just a simple one. Plastic, blue, half-used. I turned it over in my fingers, trying to picture myself without brows, without definition, without edges. I thought if I erased enough of what made me myself, maybe they'd stop. Maybe they wouldn't. See something to hate. Maybe I could look softer, smaller, smoother. Maybe I could blend. The blade hovered just above my skin. My breath was shallow. My hand shook. I imagined the line disappearing. Imagined my face fading into something less expressive, less challenging. I imagined peeling myself back layer by layer until there was nothing left to criticize. Until I became blank. But I didn't do it. Not all the way. I made one small pass, barely grazing the skin, and then I stopped. Something inside me stalled. Not because I had changed my mind. Not because I felt brave, but because the idea of not recognizing myself at all felt worse than the pain of being hated for who I was. I dropped the razor in the sink and backed away. My hands were cold. My heart beat too fast. I sat on the edge of the tub and cried without sound. The kind of crying that pulls everything inward. No sobs, no shaking. Just salt on the lips and tightness in the throat. I wiped my face and stood. Again, looked at my reflection through red-rimmed eyes. One brow thinner than the other, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I saw what I almost did. The next morning, I wore a beanie to school, pulled low over my forehead even though it wasn't cold. I kept my hoodie up, my eyes down. I didn't speak unless I had to. I avoided my brother completely. I skipped lunch. Again, not because I wanted to this time, but because I was afraid if I sat down and someone looked at me too long, I'd break. I could feel the pressure building behind my ribs. A scream lodged like a splinter. I was holding myself together. By habit, not strength. By the time I got home, I felt empty in a way that no meal could fix. I climbed the fire escape like I always did, slipped through my window, and collapsed onto my bed without taking off my shoes. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and quiet. I counted the cracks in the paint until the numbers lost meaning. My stomach twisted, but I ignored it. I told myself it would pass. Everything passed eventually. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror again. I turned my head from side to side, looked at the ink on my skin, the curve of my lips, the dark hollows under my eyes. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a fighter either. I looked like someone caught in the middle, someone eroding. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to shift. I couldn't keep folding in on myself hoping to disappear. Every day I tried to be less loud, less visible, less Nia. The world seemed to punish me more. I was starving and invisible, and still they hated me. Still they laughed. That was the moment I realized shrinking wasn't safety. It was surrender, and I was done surrendering. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how to fight back or if I even wanted to. But I knew I wouldn't vanish. Not like this. Not for them. If I was going to disappear, it would be on my terms. If I was going to speak again, it would be for myself. And maybe, just maybe, I'd say something so loud it would echo in their silence for the rest of their lives. It happened late at night, after another silent dinner and another walk through a hallway full of people who looked at me like I was dirt they weren't allowed to step around. I had stared at my phone for hours that evening, opening and closing. The camera app, watching my reflection flicker to life on the screen, only to disappear again when my thumb couldn't commit. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. I only knew I needed to say something. There was a voice rising inside me, not loud or righteous, just steady, tired of being locked in. I felt it pushing against my ribs, scratching at my throat, whispering that if I didn't speak now, I might never speak again. My room was dark except for the light from the desk lamp. I tilted the camera up slightly, resting it against an old stack of books so it wouldn't fall. I didn't fix my hoodie. I didn't reapply makeup. I didn't try to look ready because I wasn't. What I looked like was hollow. And I thought, maybe that was finally enough. I hit record. And I told the truth. I said what I had never said out loud. Not to my parents, not to my brother, not to anyone. I said that the laughter followed me home like a shadow, that it stuck to my skin like smoke. I said that walking through school felt like drowning in a hallway of mouths that knew how to chew up girls like me without leaving evidence. I said that every time someone reached out to touch my tattoos without permission, I felt like property. That every time they spit on my neck or threw their jokes into the air like they were gifts, they were stealing a part of me I hadn't even learned to defend yet. I told them what the silence felt like. Not the silence in the halls or in the classroom after a joke landed and I didn't react, but the silence at home. The silence after telling my parents what happened and hearing them explain it away. The silence of eating alone. The silence of being punished for being visible. I said it out loud. I am not the problem. I never was. I didn't cry while I said it. Not because I wasn't close. My throat burned and my chest ached. But because I had done enough crying in rooms where no one cared. I didn't want this to be another place where I broke. I wanted it to be the place where I began again. I talked about how it felt to be filmed while I was breaking down, how it felt to have your worst moment become entertainment. I said I hoped the people who shared that video thought about me when they looked at their sisters. I said I hoped they felt even an inch of what I felt every time I heard my name used as a joke. And then I looked into the lens, fully. No angles, no shadows. I let them see me. The scar above my eyebrow, the redness under my eyes, the tension in my jaw. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I told the camera that I had nothing left to lose, and that was the most dangerous thing in the world. When I hit stop, the room went quiet again, but it felt different. The silence wasn't swallowing me this time. It was waiting. I didn't edit the video. I didn't add music or filters or anything to soften the edges. I uploaded it to a small account I had barely used before. No hashtags, no tags, just the title, "If You've Laughed at Me." It was out of me now, no longer something festering in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word in my head, wondering if I had said too much or not enough. I was afraid, of course I was. But it wasn't the same kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of being hit or mocked or filmed again. It was the fear of being seen for real, of not being able to retreat once I stepped into the light. The next morning, I checked the views. There weren't many, just a few dozen. But the comments, those were different. Some were what I expected, cruel, lazy, anonymous. But others were quiet, short, honest. One said, "I didn't know anyone else felt this way." Another said, "I'm sorry." One girl messaged me directly to say she'd shaved her head after treatment and dropped out of school because she couldn't handle the stares, I replied. For the first time, I replied. Over the next few days, the video grew slowly. I didn't push it. I didn't share it anywhere big. But somehow, it moved. It traveled between inboxes. It reached people who needed it. I started getting messages from other girls, from boys who said they'd stood by and done nothing and didn't want to be that person anymore, from teachers who said they'd shown the video to their classes. Wasn't famous. I wasn't healed, but I wasn't alone anymore. That one video didn't change everything. I still walked through the same school halls, still kept my head low sometimes, still flinched when someone raised their voice too quickly. But something was different inside me. Something had shifted. I had spoken. I had named the pain. And now, it belonged to me. Not to them. Not to the ones who filmed. Not to the ones who laughed. To me. The email came on a Sunday morning, buried between junk promotions and a spam offer for weight loss tea. I almost deleted it without reading. The subject line was plain: "Speaking opportunity, TEDx inquiry." At first I thought it was a prank or some kind of scam dressed in praise, just another way to trick someone like me into hoping for something I wasn't supposed to have. But when I clicked it open, the words were clear and deliberate. They had seen my video. They had followed the ripple. They wanted me to speak, not as a statistic, not as a sob story, but as a voice, an example of something that didn't break, even when it was supposed to. I stared at the screen, blinking, barely breathing. The message read like something meant for someone else, someone with clean edges and polished sentences. Not the girl. With a tattooed throat and old bruises she still hadn't fully named. They said the theme was turning pain into power. They asked if I would be interested in sharing my story. They said they wanted my truth, however, I chose to tell it. For a long time, I sat with that offer, fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure what to say. Yes, felt too small. No, felt dishonest. But in the end, I typed it anyway. Just one word. Yes. The months between that email and the actual event passed in fragments. I wrote late at night, surrounded by old notebooks, printed comments, screenshots of messages I'd kept like proof that I wasn't imagining everything. I thought about the arc of my story, about where it started and what it meant now. I thought about what people expect from girls like me. Apologies, disclaimers, softened trauma. I decided I wouldn't give them any of it. When the day came, I stood backstage with a headset in my ear and sweat pooling in the hollow of my spine. My hands shook. My legs felt weak. But it wasn't fear the way it used to be. It wasn't fear of being mocked, filmed, or erased. It was the weight of the moment. The recognition that I was no longer speaking for survival. I was speaking because I had something to give back. They called my name. The lights shifted. The red circle on the stage felt like both a spotlight and a target. I walked out slowly, my boots echoing softly against the floor, and turned to face the crowd. They were quiet, not out of discomfort, out of attention. That silence wasn't threatening. It was open, waiting. I took a breath, one hand over the other to steady my body, and looked out into the sea of faces. And then I pressed play. The screen behind me lit up with an old, grainy video, the one I hadn't watched in months, the one where I was crouched under a desk, shoulders shaking, face hidden behind my hands. The audio crackled as my voice, choked, broken, unfamiliar, spilled through the speakers. I didn't speak over it. I let them hear it, let them see what I used to be, let them sit with the discomfort of watching a real moment of suffering, not framed for comedy or cut for memes, but raw and whole. When it ended, I looked at the audience again. No one laughed, no one moved. The air had changed. Then I began. I told them about the hallway, about the spit, about the hands that reached for my tattoos like they were braille for disgust. I told them about my brother, about how betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. I told them about the bathroom floor, the skipped meals, the nearly shaved brows, about how invisibility isn't silence, it's pain wearing a mask. And then I told them about the first time I hit record, how hard it was to look at my own face, to speak without flinching. I told them about the messages I received, about the voices that found mine and began to rise. I told them I wasn't special, I wasn't fixed. I was still scared, still healing, still learning how to be loud in a world that rewards quiet girls, with scars they never asked for. But I also told them that voice is muscle. That truth, once spoken, doesn't disappear. It lingers, it echoes, it changes things. And then I looked straight into the camera broadcasting live across the world. And I said that if anyone out there had ever been laughed at for crying, for breaking, for feeling too much, they weren't alone. I said that being mocked is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of someone else's shame. When I finished, the applause didn't come right away. It took a moment, like people needed to breathe again. And when it did come, it was slow, not explosive, not performative, just steady, real. Backstage, someone hugged me. I don't remember who. I just remember the warmth, the human weight of it. Like I was being held together, not because I was falling apart, but because I had earned the right to be whole. That night, I watched the recording. For the first time, I didn't skip the beginning. I didn't mute my voice. I didn't close my eyes when the image of the girl under the desk appeared. I watched her, and I honored her, because she had survived and because she had made this moment possible. I knew the moment would come before I ever stepped on stage. I had imagined it more times than I could count. Quiet, blurry visions in my mind while brushing my teeth, walking home, staring at the ceiling through sleepless nights. It wasn't revenge I wanted. I never wanted to make them suffer. I just wanted to be seen for who I was, without the filter of their cruelty. I wanted to know if they could look at me now and understand what they'd done, and what I'd become despite it. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of faces illuminated in soft, indirect light, eyes reflecting the screen behind me. But there were only a few I was really looking for. I spotted them before I even began. They didn't sit in the front or the back, but somewhere in the safe middle, the place where people go when they don't want to be noticed but can't bring themselves to stay away. Familiar faces I hadn't seen in years, but whose laughter I could still hear echoing through locker-lined halls and crowded cafeterias. One of them had a new haircut. Another wore a suit that didn't quite fit. They looked older, like me, but smaller somehow. Less sure of themselves. They watched the stage with stillness I didn't expect. I waited for a smirk, for a knowing glance between them, but it never came. They didn't move. They didn't whisper. They just watched, mouths pressed tight, hands folded, eyes wide. When the video played, when that old, raw footage of me beneath the desk filled the screen, the silence deepened. You could hear the breath in the room shift. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. I'd lived that moment. I'd carried it in my skin for years. Instead, I looked out at the crowd, my gaze scanning the room until it landed on the ones who had been part of the beginning, the ones who had shared the video, the ones who had laughed. They couldn't look away. As the video ended and I turned back toward the camera broadcasting live across the world, I felt a clarity settle over me that I hadn't expected. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. Because in that moment, I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't performing. I wasn't proving. I was reclaiming, not just my image, but my voice, my presence, my humanity. When I spoke, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words moved through the room like a slow wave, quiet and certain. I told them that the girl in that video was still me, that she had been fragile, yes, but not broken, that she had been humiliated, but not erased, that every tear, every silent scream, every flinch and shiver had been a seed for something stronger. I told them that I used to wonder what was wrong with me, why I was the one people loved to hurt, why I was always the joke, the target, the body people felt entitled to, ridicule. And then I stopped wondering. Because the truth was, it had never been about me. It had been about them, their fear of difference, their need to feel taller by pushing someone else to their knees. I told them I was done carrying their shame. That I had returned it to them fully, with interest. And then I turned back toward the camera. I stared into the lens as if it were a mirror, and finally saw myself, not through the cracks they left in me, not through the distortion of their cruelty, but clearly, wholly. My face, bare and present, my tattoos, no longer symbols of rebellion, but stories I had written into my own skin. My shaved head, no longer an act of defiance, but a crown I had chosen. In that moment, the silence wasn't empty. It was reverent. I knew they were watching. Those in the audience, those across the world, and those who had once watched me cry for sport. And this time, the girl on the screen wasn't a punchline. She wasn't a warning. She wasn't a victim caught mid-collapse. She was standing, she was speaking, she was me, and no one dared laugh.